More than 2 centuries ago, the Federalist Papers laid out the blueprint for a new American republic. But today, a new collection of essays is making us all ask a really tough question. Who was that republic actually for? So we're going to dive into this powerful modern response. It's called the PEDRENUS Papers, and it looks at that founding promise through a lens the original authors couldn't, or maybe wouldn't, ever see. And right off the bat, the author, who goes by PEDRENUS, grounds this whole thing in personal experience. You can feel it, right? This isn't some dry, abstract political theory. It's about that gap, that painful gap between the promise of being a citizen and the reality of being made to feel like an outsider in your own home. And that's really the core tension we're going to be exploring here. So the main argument of these papers, the big thesis, is this: that feeling of being excluded, it's not a mistake. It's not a bug in the system. PEDRENUS argues it's a feature. The whole thing was designed from the ground up to control, not to empower, the vast majority of its people. Now, this flips a classic American idea right on its head. We all learn in school that the founders were terrified of the mob, but PEDRENUS forces us to ask, well, who was the mob? And the argument here is that it wasn't some scary, violent faction. No, it was just regular people, the poor, working folks, the majority. So the system wasn't built to protect the people from a mob. It was built to protect a small group of elites from the will of the people. And this quote from paper 86, it just lands with so much weight. It's so stark, so simple. It's the perfect kind of gut punch summary of this first part of the argument, and it really sets the tone for everything else. All right. So from that foundation, the argument starts to take apart the very mechanics of American democracy. PEDRENUS says that these tools we're all taught are supposed to guarantee fairness, checks and balances, are actually just clever tools for control. You probably remember this line from civics class, right? Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. It's the whole theory of checks and balances in a nutshell. But PEDRENUS gives it this pretty chilling update. The argument is that power hasn't been checked. It's just learned how to work together, to collude. So instead of ambitious factions fighting each other for our benefit, they're making backroom deals to rule over us. And gerrymandering is presented as the perfect example of this. For PEDRENUS, this isn't just some clever political strategy. It's basically a confession. It's the system admitting out loud that to keep power, you have to literally draw cages around communities, crack their voices into pieces so they can't be heard. It turns the whole idea of representation into an instrument of silence. So if the map is rigged, what about the choices we have on it? Well, PEDRENUS argues the two-party system is basically just political theater. You've got one side that's openly hostile, and the other that offers just enough comfort to keep things from boiling over. But here's the key. Neither one is trying to fundamentally change the system. They're both just managing the population, not empowering it. Okay, so if the legislative branch is compromised, what about the courts? The judiciary is supposed to be neutral, right? Well, PEDRENUS argues that far from being neutral, the courts have actually become one of the main weapons for keeping this system of exclusion in place. The founders famously called the judiciary the least dangerous branch. Why? Because it didn't have an army. It didn't have a police force. All it had was its judgment. But PEDRENUS poses a critical question. What happens when that judgment is turned against the people? Let's take the legal concept of original meaning. PEDRENUS frames this not as some neutral way to interpret the law, but as an active choice. It's a choice to see everything through the eyes of the year 1787, a time when the people pretty much just meant white guys who owned property. So in practice, it just carries all the founders' blind spots into the present day and makes them binding law. And according to paper 91, the results are all around us. A poor person can't afford bail, while a rich person walks free. Public defenders are swamped with cases, while corporate law firms find every single loophole. The argument is, this isn't a flaw in the system. This is the system. Justice essentially becomes a luxury good, and most people can't afford the price tag. This line really gets to the moral heart of the argument. A legal system that just operates on autopilot, without any conscience, without any real sense of how it impacts actual human beings, well, it's not delivering justice. It's just enforcing an unjust order. So let's talk about the real-world cost of all this. We've looked at the political machinery, but now the argument shifts to the everyday price people have to pay just to exist, to belong, and to survive in this kind of system. Now, this is a really powerful idea. PEDRENUS argues that patriotism is often used not as an expression of love for one's country, but as a weapon to enforce obedience. The message becomes, love it or leave it, right?
Any criticism, any dissent gets framed as betrayal, and it becomes this loyalty test that some people are forced to take over and over again, while others never even get asked. And the case of Colin Kaepernick is laid out as a perfect real-world example. You have the spectacle, this big patriotic show of unity. Then you have the protest, one man kneeling silently. And then comes the punishment. He's pushed out, not because he wasn't good enough, but because he broke the unspoken rule. You are not allowed to remind the nation of its own hypocrisy.
And this question of belonging goes even deeper. The whole idea of the American dream is often sold as a story of assimilation, but PEDRENUS argues that the price of that assimilation is your identity. You're told you can join the club, but only if you're willing to disappear, to melt into the dominant culture. This part of the argument goes right after a core American myth, that if you just work hard enough, anyone can make it. PEDRENUS says, hold on a minute, the system is actually built to give a huge head start to people who are already ahead. This isn't an excuse, it's an explanation. The racial wealth gap, the tax code, how the market is structured, it's all part of this massive gatekeeping machine that ensures hard work alone is often not enough to beat a stacked deck. Okay, so after all of that, it's a pretty intense critique, right? So where does it leave us? Well, the conclusion isn't about despair. It's actually about the power that comes from just seeing the system clearly for what it is. You see this idea pop up again and again in the essays, the illusions of fairness and equal opportunity. They only work if we agree not to look too closely. The moment you pull back the curtain and see how the machinery actually works, that's the first and maybe the most important act of resistance. This line is repeated throughout the papers. It's so simple, so quiet, but it's incredibly defiant. It's its declaration of awareness. It's saying, the show is over, we're not buying the performance anymore. And this brings the entire argument full circle. Remember how the founders were afraid of a faction, the mob, taking over? PEDRENUS makes this absolutely revolutionary claim. The excluded, the forgotten, the ones who were labeled the mob, they aren't some dangerous faction. They are the people, the very people the Republic was supposed to serve all along. And so that's the final question PEDRENUS leaves us with. It's a huge one. If all the inequality and exclusion we see aren't just accidents we can patch up, but are actually part of the system's original design, then our entire idea of what it means to be the people has to change, doesn't it? And that's a challenge that goes right to the very heart of the American experiment.